Thank you, Hela, very much. I have a question. These experiments has been done at AUC, right? And this is one of the best things. I think Hela, she was an undergraduate student at American University in Cairo, and the PhD as well, and the master's. We are very happy to host all of these experiments at the campus and giving our future leaders this. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Hela. Okay, our next speaker will be Engineer Ahmed Tarek. This will be a recorded presentation, and he will talk about the net zero e-waste strategy. Ahmed Tarek, a mechatronics engineer with a master's degree in sustainable development and PhD candidate. Please welcome with me the presentation of Engineer Ahmed Tarek.
Part of this conference today. I'll be talking about a net zero e-waste strategy and guideline. But before we start, let me give you a quick brief about myself and my background. So I graduated with a master's degree in sustainable development from the American University in Cairo back in 2019. Then I was awarded the ENI Award for Young Talents from Africa, which allowed me to pursue my PhD at the Politecnico di Torino in Italy, where I'm currently conducting my research. So today's presentation will be divided into 5 different sections. We will start with a quick introduction about what is e-waste, how we can define it, and why is it important to properly handle it and to achieve net zero waste. Then we will take a quick overview about the global e-waste management systems currently implemented in various countries and what are the main concepts that are shared amongst most of these systems. Then we will be defining how we can close the management cycle and achieve the net zero waste. Thus, we will be defining the points of improvement in the management cycle of e-waste. Talking about which, we will take a quick look about e-waste rejects upcycling, which was developed during my master's degree in order to... So before we dive deeper into how we can reach net zero e-waste, we first need to identify and define what is e-waste. So basically, e-waste is any electric device that reaches its end of life. And by electric device, this is any device that uses electricity, whether the electric grid or battery and accumulators as a source of powering. And when these devices are no longer in use, they reach their end of life, whether because of technological advancements and therefore they are being upgraded, or because they are no longer working, they are non-functional, they become e-waste. So this basically, under this umbrella, we can say that e-waste covers cell phones, tablets, smartphones, all the small and smart gadgets, TV sets, personal computers, scanners and copiers. Also, and in some regulations and some countries, they include the domestic devices such as vacuum cleaners, microwaves, refrigerators and freezers. And so any electric device that uses electricity in any manner at its end of life can be defined as e-waste. So why should we care about the proper handling of e-waste? Well, from sustainability point of view, we have the 3 main pillars of sustainability: the environmental, the social, and the economic aspects. So basically, the environmental aspect of e-waste is that e-waste is generated in large volumes annually. Just for the year 2014, 41.8 million tons of e-waste was generated. These waste include heavy metals, which can easily leach into the soil. They include chemicals and other hazardous materials, which, when usually there is no regulations that guide the proper handling of this, they end up being dumped in open dumps, and this can lead to leaching and contamination of soil and water, as well as in some cases where there is no proper practices followed for the management of e-waste. Some people try to extract these heavy metals and these precious metals that are found inside the e-waste through, for example, wires. They try to burn the plastic that covers and insulates the wires in order to extract the copper it's inside. And so this open air burning also releases lots of toxins such as the BFRs. Further on, from the environmental aspect or from the environmental point of view, recycling and the proper handling of e-waste reduces the pollution, not just because of the not dumping these wastes, but also because the use of recycled materials saves energy and saves the whole raw material extraction and production from the beginning. And so from the environmental point of view, it is really important, based on the volumes generated annually, to properly handle e-waste. Well, from the economic point of view as well, we should highlight that also in the year 2014, 48 billion euros of recovered materials was generated from e-waste. This also helped in 95% energy savings because of these raw materials, because of these materials that were recovered and reused instead of extracting these materials from the raw ores in the Earth's crust. Further on, as previously mentioned, since e-waste contains rare and precious metals, the recovery of these rare and precious metals also helps the economies and the local economies in which this extraction process and recovery process happens. Also, in addition to the economic aspect of the material recovery, avoiding the dumping and the mishandling of e-waste protects the societies around which there would have been these dumps, and so it also protects the people living around these areas from possible disease, since e-waste usually contains chemicals and other heavy metals that can be carcinogenic or cause other disease. And so this reduces the burden, the financial burden from the economic point of view, on the national health systems. From the social aspect, as we mentioned, that disease can be caused due to exposure, due to the mishandling of electronic waste, but also there has been found in research that the mishandling of e-waste can cause DNA damage and skin and lung disease also, because from the social point of view, usually when it's not regulated, women and children are exploited in these sectors, and and they're exposed to hazardous materials without any PPEs or otherwise. And so from the social aspect, not just the health and the disease point of view, but also the proper handling generates new jobs and creates new jobs for the local societies that are working in it. So before we take a quick overview about the regulations set up globally for the proper handling of e-waste and the e-waste management systems, let's first define what is an EPR program, which is the Extended Producer Responsibility Programs. This is the core of most global systems for e-waste management, and they stand for the polluter pays principle, which obligates producers, or the ones who are producing the products that pollute the environment, to pay for the proper handling in order to avoid such pollution. And so EPR programs usually can be found in countries, depending on the regulations. They can be voluntarily set up by the companies of the producers, or they can be mandatory based on the law. Also, they can be that every company handles its own waste and that's it, or it can be made up of a consortium of various companies and brands that handle together all their products, which can be more economically friendly from the economic point of view. The importance of EPR programs is also that they define the financial responsibilities and the targets for the proper handling of waste. And so with these targets being set and with proper reporting, optimization of such programs can be achieved. And so, having explained what are EPR programs, the EU regulations are based on EPR programs. So basically, in the EU, there are 4 various directives and regulations that can be found. The difference between a directive and a regulation is that a directive sets out the general guidelines and leaves for every EU member state the interpretation based on national law. However, the regulations, they are just already set up and they are generalized on all EU member countries, and so they are more strictly enforced, and they avoid the discrepancies between the implementation and the interpretation of the various national laws of the EU member countries. And so the first directive that is in place in the EU is the WEEE, which stands for the Waste from Electric and Electronic Equipment Directive. And in this directive, they define the 10 categories under which e-waste is, or the umbrella that covers the e-waste. And so they define that 10 different categories of the of e-waste, and it obligates and it puts the producer on the burden of handling the e-waste on the producer. So basically, the consumer does not have to pay anything at the end of life of their product. They can. The price they pay for when buying the device includes the fees for the handling of e-waste at the end of life. And so collection centers always, which collect the e-waste at the end of life, always are free of charge. And so it gives more encouragement to the consumer to go there, since they're not going to be paying anything more. It also obligates that producers identify any hazardous materials that are included in their devices. Second directive that is in place in the EU is the RoHS, and it stands for the Restriction of Hazardous Substance Directive. And this directive covers any device or equipment that might use electricity for a secondary function, and it limits the use of certain materials that are hazardous, such as mercury, cadmium, polyperminated biphenyls, which are usually used in flame retardants, and this helps to reduce the possible contamination, the possible hazards that can be associated with e-waste. They also have a special directive that is for batteries, which is called the Batteries Directive. It bans mercury and cadmium batteries and requires producers to collect these batteries at no cost, same as with the WEEE. It also requires spreading awareness about batteries and how they can be properly handled, and the proper labeling of these batteries. Finally, within the EU, there is the REACH, which is the Registration, Evaluation, Authorization and Restriction of Chemicals regulation. In this case, it is a regulation and not a directive, and so it's more strictly enforced. And this regulation aims to protect the environment and human health and encourage innovation by banning and by controlling how hazardous chemicals are put on the EU market. And so when some chemicals that are considered extremely hazardous or extremely toxic are banned from being put on the market, it encourages the innovation and the use of and finding other possible chemicals that can be used that are less hazardous and less toxic. And they ensure the proper handling of chemical substances that pose a threat to human health or the environment. Regarding developing countries such as African countries and Southeast Asian countries, which are both destinations for e-waste exportations that were previously being done from the European continent and were massed under donations to these countries. First of all, the African countries such as Ghana, Uganda, and Rwanda, they have their own e-waste handling programs, which are based on EPR programs again, and they define the roles of stakeholders and their interrelations among each other, and so they're quite clear about who handles what and who does what, and so this avoids any ambiguity and misunderstanding between the roles of the stakeholders, and avoids any loopholes or breaching. Most of these handling systems, they prioritize the reuse of products and then the recycling of these products, and they require the record keeping and reporting of the collected devices and the collected and handled devices, and specify the handling method of discarded materials. So they're very specific and extremely intricate. However, their implementation might not be extremely strictly enforced. Regarding the Southeast Asian countries such as India, China, and Malaysia, they also have their own regulations, which also are based on EPR programs, and they define the roles and of each stakeholder. For example, China banned the importation of e-waste entirely, so right now no e-waste can enter there. Most of the handling of e-waste in developing countries, whether in Africa and Southeast Asia, were dominated by informal sectors. So, for example, in Southeast Asian countries, informal sectors are still allowed to operate within the handling of e-waste after their examination and ensuring that they do not pose any health or environmental hazards in the way and the methods they are following. So they require the handlers to acquire licenses. So they're kind of transforming informal handlers into formal handlers without further burden on them, and with more encouragement for them to continue operating, however, in a more safe and environmentally friendly and health friendly method. They define clearly what e-waste is, and they integrate the informal sector. And so this is one important thing to highlight, because this is one way of not combating, but to integrate the informal sector and to encourage them to be part of the system. And so again, this is job opportunity creating. This is, from the social aspect, extremely important. Having defined e-waste and taken a quick overlook on the different regulations and policies that are in place, now we need to go into the technical part of how to properly handle e-waste in order to achieve net zero waste. And so the proper handling processes, or the various handling processes that are found within e-waste, are start basically with the separation of the different components of e-waste. So these separations can be based on type, can be based on size, can be based by components. So basically, TV can be first of all separated the plastic frame from the liquid screen, from the electrical motherboard, and so this separation allows to further on down the recycling system and the handling system achieve a higher quality recycled materials. And so also the separation can be done by materials, based on the materials, just like I was explaining. And usually these kind of separations, they can start by manual separations, such as the separation of the various electronic devices collected, and then they can automatic or semi-automatic operations can be incorporated into the system. Further on, after the separation phase, size reduction comes in. Size reduction helps liberate the metals and the various materials, and so their extraction and separation further on in order to purify and to enrich their quality when extracting them and recovering each and every material. And so the size reduction can be done through crushing, grinding, or shredding. Afterwards, pre-treatment comes in place. And so the pre-treatment is the initial treatment phase, which allows the initial separation or further separation of these materials after the revelation from the size reduction. So usually this can be done through froth flotation, which uses the and also or gravity separation, which both use the different masses and the different densities of materials in order to separate them. Then there is magnetic and electrostatic separations, which use the magnetic properties of materials to separate between ferromagnetic and non-ferromagnetic materials. After such pre-treatments are done, usually metallurgical treatments can be done in order to extract the metals and recover them. So usually metallurgical treatments can be either hydrometallurgical, which use chemicals, or pyrometallurgical, which use the pyrolysis or are based on pyrolysis process. Afterwards, these treatment processes, they generate rejects, which are the materials that are no longer no one is interested in. And this is the part we will talk further about, because this is where closing the loop and achieving net zero comes in. So one of the major rejects from e-waste is the printed circuit boards, PCBs for short. And they are considered rejects because they are made of silicon wafers that are usually covered with various precious and heavy metals. And then when these, during the handling process, the handlers, they extract the metals that are there, which are more precious, and then they discard the silicon wafers. So the silicon wafer part of the PCBs, they represent the highest fraction of nonmetals included in e-waste by weight. And we have to mention that 70% of e-waste is made of nonmetals. And so these PCBs, they represent really significant volumes of the generated e-waste. And so based on the cradle-to-cradle approach and the net zero waste approach that we're trying to achieve, it makes more sense to find a method in order to upcycle, to give more economic value to these rejects, in order to encourage handlers to also extract them and to use them for other products. And so we've been working on developing such a thing. So we've used the PCBs extracted from e-waste after their handling. We've prepared the process of mixing them with polystyrene at ratios of 10% to 30% polystyrene, and we have tested this new material that we found in order to propose possible usages for such material. And so this mixture of PCB rejects with polystyrene, and when subjected to temperature and pressure for a specific time, a material was produced. And this material, as shown in the pictures, the picture on the left shows the percentage of 75% PCB rejects to 25% polystyrene, and the picture on the right, which is more green, has more PCB content in it, which is 90% to 10% polystyrene. The material properties were tested against marble in order to propose the usage of this new material as a substitute for marble as tiles and countertops. And so the properties have proven to be competitive with marble, and especially that of the 25% polystyrene to 75% e-waste rejects. The material has high abrasion resistance and is extremely hard, and such use for instead of marble as countertops and tiles can also be more lucrative to handlers to not reject this material, but to use it and upcycle it. In order to conclude our talk about achieving net zero e-waste, the figure in the slide here summarizes and shows what can be considered as an optimal e-waste handling system, which starts with proper collection system in place, then the testing of the collected materials or the collected devices in order to identify the ones which can be reused and refurbished and then resold again. So we are minimizing the waste here, and the ones that cannot be refurbished would be then disassembled and again retested in order to reuse and resell the working parts and components, and the removal and disposal of hazardous parts. Meanwhile, the parts which can be recycled and recovered go into the mechanical pre-processing we spoke about previously, such as the size reduction and the initial material separation. And from the initial material separation, the materials recovered can then, at this phase, can then be further on purified into higher quality and higher purity recovered materials. The ones that are still in need of further processing would go through the hydrometallurgy in order to separate the different metals and to separate metals from non-metals and from any impurities, and then again back into the recovery and the reuse of these raw materials. So achieving from the hydrometallurgy recycled raw materials that are of high quality, and then the rejects upcycling, which was actually covered during our talk. For example, that of the PCB handling, and finally, in order to achieve new products. And so closing the cycle, minimizing the waste, and approaching net zero waste. Finally, I'd like to thank everyone for your attention, and I hope that you found this presentation insightful and helpful in achieving